once it comes, it comes to the trade and commerce, there are few things that we need to remember, and and in fact these are the things which are most important. Once once Harappa or other sites were discovered, then what happened that from the earliest times you'll find that comparison started between Harappa and Mesopotamian civilization, right? And there are few reasons for that. I just told you that initially what happened, they just wanted to find the influence of the Mesopotamian or the Egyptian civilization on Indus Valley civilization, and because of what that that started. And once few evidences or few sources came, and those sources basically emphasize emphasize on the trading relationship between the Harappan and the Mesopotamians and the people from Egypt, right? And they started highlighting this, right? They started emphasizing on this idea, and in fact the idea or the mentality which they had, that is very clear. So instead of instead of studying the Harappans individually, we always try to understand the Harappans with the eye of the Mesopotamian or the Egyptian cultures. So initially what happened, we found some of the Indian stuff, some of the Harappan stuff in Mesopotamia, and we very simply concluded it that they were having very advanced or very sort of good trade between these two, I mean between Harappans and the Mesopotamians. And then this cross cultural comparison, right, or the cross cultural study and some other things came into limelight. And after that, as I told you, when we are trying to fix the date for Indus Valley civilization or the Harappan civilization, what they did actually, they simply tried to compare it with the Mesopotamia, and they simply said, okay, if that was the date of Mesopotamia, this must be the date of mature phase of Harappans, right? So that was the earlier idea, and that is why from the earliest time we'll find that people were highly emphasizing on the trade of Indus or the trade of Harappans with the Mesopotamians. But later on some new discoveries came up and some new ideas came up, and finally they realized one thing, that's a wrong pattern which has been followed or emphasized by them, and then they started revisiting their work, and finally they have come with some new conclusions, right? So whenever you are writing anything as such, you'll begin with that emphasis initially they have tried to understand I mean to say Indus Valley or Harappans with the eye of the Mesopotamians, and that is where there was a there was some extra emphasis on this particular trade. But later on this earlier notion got changed, and then they have started rethinking on it, and finally they realized one thing, actually the Indians or the Harappans did not have that much extended trade with Mesopotamians. Try to get my point, right? So we are just talking about the new ideas or the new views rather than this old old fashioned view. So now what are they saying? The first thing which is very important, that it's very much likely or possible that the Mesopotamian people were not directly connected to the Indus Valley civilization, right? Now what are they saying? Definitely there were few words, right? Definitely there were few words that could be seen in the Mesopotamian scripts, such as Dilmun, Makan and Meluha, right? So they compared Dilmun with Bahrain, right? That this is the Bahrain island. Then they compared the the another the Makan with the Makan with, sorry, can't hear you. Indus Valley civilization. No, Makan with what are the countries? The Gulf Lake countries? Gulf countries. Oman. They compared Makan with Oman, right? And then they said that the term Meluha might be used for the whole land which was falling on the eastern side of Mesopotamia, right? It was not a specific word used for the Harappans, right? Maybe possible that it was used for Harappas also, but there is another argument which came up. So somehow we can see that now that idea of India's trade or the Harappa's trade with the Mesopotamia has been revisited, and that is where some new concepts are also coming for this, right? So whenever we need to discuss the trade of Indus Valley civilization or the Harappans, we need to consider all such kind of ideas, right? So let us discuss one by one. When we need to discuss about the trade and commerce, right? So basically the trade, right? So there are two things that must be considered. First, local trade, and then the second, foreign trade, right? So let us begin the discussion with the local trade, right? So if we need to discuss about the local trade, so definitely there are two areas which are very, profound, right? So the first thing, whenever you are talking about the local trade, so definitely there must be lots of connections, right, or lots of channels through which the trade was conducted. So basically whenever you are talking about local trade, so definitely one thing without any doubt we can discuss about the trade between the urban areas and the local areas or the rural areas, right? So of course if we find the granaries in the urban areas, it means it definitely the local the granaries or the basically the staple food crops, these were cultivated in the rural areas and then carried to the urban areas. That might be in the name of tax, that might be in the name of exchanges, right? Anything, because as they were not using the coins, right? And that is why the exchange or the barter system must be the most dominant idea. So one trade that is for sure being was taking place between the rural areas and the urban areas. The first thing. The second thing, it is not necessary that the things which are being produced in the urban areas could not be seen in the rural areas, right? Even the things, basically the craft that we have discussed so far, these were very profoundly could be seen in the rural areas as well. And it is very simply proving one thing, yes, there was a sort of trade network between the urban areas and the rural areas. For sure that is true. But when you are talking about urban area and rural area, that time you must consider one more thing, that as we have discussed about certain specific centers for a particular craft, right? If you are talking about seals, so there were few areas which were producing it. If you are talking about the terracotta figurines, again there were few specific areas. Seam could be said for jewelry, seam could be said for the so for the iron, the metals basically. So it means it was not only confined to the city area and the urban areas, right? Urban areas and the rural areas. Definitely the other areas, as there were some areas which were specific or specialized in making any particular thing, and that is why there must be a trade which was not only confined to these two urban areas and the rural areas, rather it was going to other parts also. Is the idea clear? Right now? Got my point to do? Right. And apart from that, we have definitely tried to find out that what are the sources for the raw materials present within the country, right? And of course, while talking about that, apart from this, whatever we have discussed so far, then they tried to find out the centers for the raw materials or the sources, right? And then they found two areas which were very specific, because while discussing the local trade, the first thing that was copper. And in fact, whenever we are talking about that Harappan civilization, there should not be any doubt that somehow copper was one of the basic stuff being used by them, and that is why they started finding the source for the copper, and they discovered, yes, the coppers from Khetri, Rajasthan, that was discovered much earlier and was being used by them. And in fact, it had huge collection of copper, and that is why very confirmedly we can say one thing, that the copper was supplied from Khetri itself, and throughout the civilization it was Khetri which kept on supplying the copper to them, right? Okay, fine. Apart from copper, the another thing, that is gold. So for gold we said that Karnataka is the area which supplied the gold to them. And in fact, there are certain other evidences which are trying to prove this. Because you might have heard one place, in fact we have discussed also. Remember this? Pickley Hill. It's a Neolithic site. It's a Neolithic site, right? And in fact, we find that the use of the Neolithic people of Pickley Hill, they were using the stuff of or the artifacts of Harappan civilization. What does it mean? It's very simply proving one thing, that the people from Karnataka, they got connected with the people of people of Harappan civilization, and that is why we can say at least these two local trades that were very profound among the Harappans, right? And in fact, recently also there was a research and there were certain findings for this Karnataka, and that idea became more dominant, that they were getting the gold from this area, right? So somehow this was the local trade that could be discussed. Now if you are moving to the foreign trade, right? If you are moving to the foreign trade or the trade with the contemporary cultures, in that case you'll find it as initially maximum focus was on Mesopotamia. But later on it has been realized it was not the center for the Harappan trade, rather the focus started on Persian Gulf, right? So instead of saying that Mesopotamia was the main center from where Indians or the Harappans were having trade, they started giving an alternative idea. It was not Mesopotamia, but the Persian Gulf, which was directly connected to the Harappans. And in fact, there must be those centers such as I discussed about Bahrain, right, and the Oman, right. So they are saying that actually the the Harappans were not directly going to the Mesopotamia. Rather, what happened? They were carrying their stuff to either Oman or Bahrain, and from here these were carried to these places. And in fact, recently we have received so many such evidences which are very directly proving one thing, that it was the Persian Gulf which was directly connected to Indus Valley civilization than any other Harappan civilization, not the Mesopotamia. Now, if we'll talk about the roots, right? If we'll talk about the roots, suppose this is Harappa and this is Mohenjo-daro, right? Sorry, Mohenjo-daro, right? In that case, what will you find? That there were several routes which were connecting to each other, right? But there were two prominent routes that could be discussed. Do you remember that site in Afghanistan? Right? So there was a route which was connecting to Sortughai, and Sortughai was through the land route connected to the Persian Gulf, right? And there was a route which came through this way. I hope you remember one more site, that was Sutkange door, right? And from the sea route, it was from the Oman and the Bahrain, it was going to the Persian Gulf, right? I'll just put some pictures today in the group, right? And then you'll understand in a better way. So somehow there were two prominent routes, right? And there was one more site, that was Lothal. Lothal was also connected to this route, right? And there were so many other channels which were connected to, like Kalibanga and Rakhigarhi, Dhalavira. Other routes were also there. So that was the trading network that we should remember. That's it. Nothing else we are supposed to discuss for the trade and commerce, right? So as I told you that we are not going to discuss about the commodities which were being traded or some other things, right? So basically we will discuss on the conceptual part, right? So you just note down something which is giving the conceptual idea for the Indus Valley civil for the trade of Harappans rather than the factual parts, right?
Sir, sea trades proves that they had vast knowledge of seed making.
Of course. Of course. Write down trade, networks of trade.
Sir, then why can't we use the term for cap?
Sorry?
Shipmaking for boats, they're using boats.
Yeah.
Then why can't we use that part?
Well, definitely we can use the ship making also as one of the advanced craft being used by them. But there's one problem. What is the problem? So far we haven't found any as such evidence for the ship making, right? Because the Lothal and Sutkange door, as I discussed, that these were the two dockyards used by them, and somehow, of course, if any as such profession would be there or the craft would be there, so these sites must be giving certain ideas for that, but somehow we haven't received any as such evidence. Right. The discovery of Harappan civilization, generated a great deal of interest in Harappan Mesopotamian trade. Harappan Mesopotamian trade. Trade links, Harappan Mesopotamian trade links. this is because before the advent of radiocarbon dating, these links gave vital clues
Links or links?
sorry links vital clues for dating Harappan culture. It was also due to prevailing interest in cross-cultural comparisons. It was also due to prevailing cross-cultural comparisons. Over the years, many scholars have come to the conclusion that Harappan Mesopotamian trade may not have been as substantial as earlier held. Other areas such as Persian Gulf have been identified as important zones of interaction as far as long distance trade was going on. Sorry, क्या लिखा दिया है? As far as the long distance trade, long distance trade was concerned. However, it is clear that trade networks within the Harappan culture zone and those linking the culture with other areas in the subcontinent were extremely significant significant and important to understand the cultural homogeneity. The importance of such trade is clear from the very wide range of raw materials and finished goods that they found their way to different parts of the vast Harappan cultural zone.
So found their way.
Found their way, what did you write? Different parts of the vast culture zone. This trade was much before the advent of coinage so must be using barter system. Change the paragraph. One of the important aspects of Harappan trade is the identification of the sources of major raw materials used by them. Though we don't have trustworthy sources some patterns have been identified by the historians. Such as the raw materials used by Harappans and their location within the civilization. Now this is about their local trade, right? Got my point? समझ में आई या नहीं? ठीक है. I just told you that the first part with the foreign trade, I try to discuss something, and then I said कि when we need to understand the pattern of their trade, we need to understand few things, right? The first thing, what are the raw materials used by them, right? If they are using bronze stuff, it means that copper and tin were required. So if copper and tin were required, so then we try to locate those raw materials in the closest areas, right? So okay, if it is about copper, so they finally located copper in Khetri, Rajasthan. So they that imagine in a way that they must be getting the copper from that area. Once they tried to locate the tin, they could not get it, right? So the closest area they found Afghanistan, and in fact the trade route, that one, so to gai, was connecting them to Afghanistan. So what does it mean? They must be getting it from here, right? Because from the Afghanistan we don't have much sources, but we do have evidences that the people were, they were extracting the tin from those areas, right? So we just assumed in a way that they must be, extracting, or they were getting the tin from that area. If it comes to gold, right? So they tried to hunt this part. Okay, fine. The kolar mines were being used by them, even during that particular period. So they must be getting from this area, right? So somehow the archaeological evidences are not telling us much, right? But we just try to analyze the pattern of trade in this way. So there we need to discuss about some of the patterns specifically in the local trades, because if it is about closeness to the sources, if it is about the closeness, right, to the sources, in that case it is about the local trade, right? तो इसके बारे में हम local trade में बात करेंगे, and then we just find certain points in the the notes, right, and club it with that. So okay, you'll find certain patterns like Rohari Hills, from there they were getting the stones, then the bronze, the copper, and then gold, and so somehow we'll finish the local trade, right? So that's it. In local trade there is no as such serious analysis that we need to put, right? Okay, fine. Now once we come to the foreign trade, right? Achha, one more thing that we must discuss in the local trade, right? Someone just by making a star, you can note it down. That one thing you might have noticed, that these people were very fond of cards, है ना? Bronze cards, and the terracotta figurines of cards. So if cards they were using, I mean definitely these are the toys, right? Let me try to get my point very in a good way, right? We haven't received any as such evidence of the card, right? But so much terracotta figurines or the bronze sculptures we have found for the card. It means that they must be very fond of the cards, right? And apart from that, as I'm telling you that the cards we haven't found so far, right? But the lines which were drawn by the crafts, right, is by the cards, right? This could be seen and found. So maybe it is possible as the craft for making the card, right? Normally we are using वुड, ठीक है. तो अगर कोई भी चीज लकड़ी का बना हुआ है तो कितने दिन तक सर्वाइव करेगा? नहीं करेगा. इट्स क्वाइट ऑब्वियस, ठीक है. तो दैट इज व्हाई वेरी मच पॉसिबल कि दे डिड नॉट गेट द वी हैवंट गॉट एनी कार्ड, बट इट वाज बीइंग यूज्ड बाय देम, राइट? एंड व्हील के एविडेंसेस तो है ही हमारे पास. वी डू हैव द एग्जांपल्स फॉर द व्हीट, राइट? सो द कार्ट वाज अनदर इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट फॉर देयर लोकल ट्रेड, बिकॉज मोस्ट ऑफ द थिंग्स वर कैरीड थ्रू द कार्ट ओनली, राइट? Sorry? Eastern side of the civilization? What label you are talking about? Eastern India. So I just told you, from Khetri they were having trade, from Karnataka they were having trade. If are you talking about Bengal region? Sorry? Definitely Neolithic people were also there. That's very much true. But if you are talking about Bengal, so let me tell you one thing. That time, that region was not, this area was not habited by people, the Bengal region. मैंने पहले भी बात की थी शायद एक बार, नहीं. That area was actually swampy. You must be knowing about Sundarban Delta. That delta was not smaller, it was bigger, right? and most of the Bengal was actually covered by the Sundarban Delta, and that is why people did not used to live in that area. Bengal got habited only after the colonial period, only after the Gupta period, right? Then only the Sundarban Delta dried up and people started living on those areas, and gradually the process of colonization started in Bengal region. Clear? Okay, fine. If you come to that Neolithic people, right? So that Neolithic people, sometimes they were contemporary to the Indus people, right? And sometimes even they are coming after Harappan civilization. Got my point? And the next thing, they did not have any as such what? They did not have any as such, resources, right? They needed copper, right? They needed gold. But as you do understand, if you are talking about that, Mirzapur or the Belan Valley, right? So these stuff, these areas were not having any as such source, right? And that is why they did not have any trade with them. दूर तक सोचते हैं तुतुल. For the roots, I'll be putting. In fact, I think that is what I just wanted to confirm, that I have, have I put the pictures in the notes or not? But आप लोग carry नहीं करते अपने साथ? Not there. The pictures are not there. So I'll just put the pictures in the group, right? And you just try to find out कि okay, these are the trade routes which were being followed by them. और ये पिक्टोरियल में मेरी होती है, ज़्यादा लंबा चलती है, ठीक है. रूट्स मैंने बता दिए, but somehow one will see in the map, will understand in a better way that what routes were being followed by them, right? Okay, so once it comes to this foreign trade, right? So as I have discussed about some of the patterns in the foreign trade, initially the emphasis was with Mesopotamia, but later on this idea got changed, and then they started focusing on some other trade, right? So you just give a small heading. There you just write down note. Where you have ended this, you just write note, right? Right, and write down the local trade. Local trade has to be discussed here. Has to be discussed here. ठीक है, इसको एक बॉक्स में बंद कर दिए. You got my point or not? The evidence, the examples are given in the notes, right? तो यहाँ पे मैं उसी को dictate कर रहा हूँ. There is no point of doing that, right? The examples are given there, right? So come to the foreign trade. Just give a small heading, right? Foreign trade, and write the main source of information, main sources of information on long distance trade. Long distance trade include a number of Harappan or include a number of Harappan or Harappan related artifacts found at sites outside the subcontinent, comma, and foreign objects found at Harappan sites. Got the point? Simple, right? These are supplemented by textual sources textual sources in the case of Indus Mesopotamia trade. In the case of Indus Mesopotamia trade. Then again you write a note. Some examples of such evidences from the printed notes. Must be supplemented from the printed notes. It's a hint, so you can write it anyway.
So while discussing trade and cost, can't we use the trade items instead of them?
Well, again I must say you, ultimately if you are writing all these details, you won't get very good marks. You need to just discuss in a single sentence. These are the things of export and these are the things for the import. That's it. It's over. There's no need of going further, right? Okay, fine. Again a single, single or two sentences, right? One sentence you discuss, in one sentence you discuss this route, right? And the another sentence you discuss this route. That's it, or 2 or 3 lines, right? So these are the things not getting you marks. The analysis which is getting you marks. Further you write. After seeing the evidences, now the scholars have concluded the long distance trade in a way that Mesopotamia has been overemphasized in the early writings. The words such as Dilmun, Magan and Meluha used in Mesopotamian inscriptions indicate to Bahrain, the Makran coast, Oman, and the eastern side which included Harappans as well. as the idea of Indus Mesopotamian trade mainly based on the seals, and some other stuff which are in a very small number very small number. Can I see the sentence, please? Very small number do not justify the assumptions regarding extended trade between these two. It may be the result of an indirect trade. Indirect trade. Serene Ratnagar highlights the importance of the trade, especially the trade in lapis lazuli, and even argued that its decline was a reason for the decline of Harappan civilization. Got the point? What did she say? She said India was having very flourished trade with Mesopotamia, especially lapis lazuli. That stuff is supposed to be very important in Harappan civilization. And once this trade declined, the Harappan civilization declined. That is her argument, right? So as I told you that normally the artifacts that we find, the Harappan artifacts in Mesopotamia and vice versa, in number these are very less. And that is why two modern historians include Jim Saffer and Ranveer Chakravarti. Write down. But this idea has been negated. By Jim Saffer and Ranveer Chakravarti on the basis of the lack of Harappan artifacts in Mesopotamia and vice versa. Change the paragraph. Recently, the trade of Harappans with the Persian Gulf has been emphasized on the ground of many evidences such as seals, three-headed animal motif, मोटिव एक तरीके का सिंबल है, ठीक है, थ्री हेडेड एनिमल मोटिव एंड सर्टेन सिमिलरिटीज इन राइटिंग. Certain similarities in writing. Change the paragraph. The argument that the argument that the quantum of Harappan long distance trade, was not great as persuasive. Persuasive, persuasive. Unlike the resource poor area Mesopotamia, the Harappan culture zone was rich in a variety of natural resources. Full stop. Food requirements and most of the raw materials required by Harappan craft persons could have been met by the resources available within the Harappan cultural zone. And only a limited part of it has been achieved through long distance trade. Got the point, right? Now what they are saying, look, if you're comparing in that way, that is not perfect, right? Because they have proved it was not like, the previous, assumption. So they are saying, look, as far as the natural resources are concerned, so mostly they were getting the stuff from the, from within the land only, right? And that is what they are saying, it was always overemphasized, right? And in fact, they have compared Mesopotamia, and that area was not very fertile, and that is why they were not even getting the proper food from their own area, and that is why they are saying it may be possible that they required our help, right? But we didn't require to that extent the help of the Mesopotamia or the Western, civilizations. But yes, very limited stuff which they imported, such as, what did you write? Raw materials from, instead of, long distance trade, through long distance trade from Central Asia and Afghanistan. Trade from Central Asia and Afghanistan. Right? So they are saying they are more self-dependent, the Harappans, but they were not, right? So you'll just end your answer by writing this, right? So I hope you got the clear. If you need to discuss about their long distance, the trade, right? So you had to develop your answer in this pattern. You have to negate the previous notions rather than writing the same thing. Okay, we have find the seals, we have find the scripts and some other things. That's an old answer, right? So we need to discuss the answers in a different way, and sub-factual information should be there to substantiate your answer, right? So now we are left with, religion and decline, right? That will be doing tomorrow, and tomorrow we'll end this topic, right? That's it. And then we'll begin with what? Chalcolithic, right? And first we'll do Chalcolithic. Megalithic, I am skipping right now. Megalithic, I am skipping right now, and that will start, or that will cover just before the Sangam, because that's a continuity. Megalithic, then Sangam, and then we'll finish it, right? So that there will be a continuity, right? And we'll be able to understand in a better way. So first we'll finish Chalcolithic and then move to the Vedic. Okay, see you tomorrow.